Next Pats podcast is presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We have Dan Lanning, head coach of the Oregon Football Ducks, coming at you on Next Pats this week to talk to us, of course, about Christian Gonzalez, Patriots first-round pick. Why is the fit as good as we all believe it to be? Where does Dan stand on that front? And can Dan set us straight on some of the intangible aspects of Christian Gonzalez, the person, the player, that have come out about him that I've shared with you on this podcast, concerns that teams had about Christian Gonzalez in the makeup department, physicality, personality, things of that nature. What can Dan tell us about who Christian Gonzalez is? Great resource for us to have here on the podcast. Dan, of course, was the outside linebackers coach for Georgia in 2018. Then in 2019, he got promoted to the defensive coordinator, served in that role under Kirby Smart from 19, 20, and 21, then became head coach for Oregon last year in 2022. So let's get right to it. Let's get to our conversation with Dan Lanning to learn more about Patriots first-round pick, Christian Gonzalez. All right, very excited now to have with us on Next Pats, Dan Lanning, head coach of Oregon. Dan, thanks so much for being with us here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So excited to learn a little bit more about Christian Gonzalez, the more and more time that he spends with the team. He's just sort of getting his feet wet with the organization right now. But I want to ask you first, obviously you're familiar with the Patriots organization. You're at Oregon. You have been at Georgia. Obviously the Patriots spent a lot of time there and drafted a bunch of their guys in the past. What was your first thought when you saw that Christian would be going to the Patriots in the first round?
Well, perfect fit. I think you're anxious because you're excited for Christian. You want him to get drafted, but when you talk about organizations that you can go play for, you can get to play for the Patriots and Coach Belichick, that's pretty unique. And then, recently one of our coaches just joined the staff there for y'all, Adrian Clem. So it's nice knowing that he has, a familiar face up there with him that'll be looking out for him. So I think it's a perfect fit, and I think it's a great setup for Christian.
A couple of Ducks in some very key roles for the Patriots, it looks like, going into 2023 here. And I'm sure, and I know the Patriots are excited to have both of those guys. When it comes to Christian in particular, what makes him a perfect fit? What about Christian from his makeup or even just, I guess, specifically on the field, Dan? We could talk about that too. Why he would fit in a Bill Belichick defense.
Yeah, if you were building a player in Madden, right, you'd create them very similar to Christian, especially for the quarter position. He's got length, he's got size, he's got speed. He carries that size very effortlessly, and he can obviously run. So those are skill sets you look for in a DB. He has great ball skills. I honestly believe he could play wide out if somebody needed to play wide out. He could be a returner as well if somebody needed that. We didn't ask him to do that, but we probably should have at times. But he has all the skill sets. So if you're designing a player, you design him in the mold of Christian, and then maybe more importantly in my mind is he has the mindset. The next play or the last play never affects the next play. He's able to hit the flush, button really easily, and his demeanor is very calculated. Some people might take it as a lack of passion. That's not the case at all. The guy's extremely passionate, but he's very focused and he's able to play within the moment. So I think the Patriots are getting a really good one. I've had a lot of really good DBs, and he ranks up there as high as any of them.
Well, it's why you're such a great person to ask. I mean, you've had a bunch of guys, talk about your experience at Georgia and the number of highly drafted defensive players, sure, but especially defensive backs that you've seen. And it does feel like, with Christian going as high as he's gone, the expectations will be high for him. I did want to ask you about his demeanor. You mentioned the flush button, how quickly he can hit that thing. It did look like even on draft night, he was expected to go by a lot of people, who knows what the mock drafts actually mean, but by a lot of people to go in the top 10. He slides to the middle of the first round. And yet for a 20-year-old, he's still not even 21 years old yet, to be as even keeled as he was is something that stood out to me. And I think stood out to those that were with him and around him. But can you speak to just the poise that he showed in the time that you were with him? Again, he's such a young guy.
Well, he's got a great family, and he's in a family of athletes. His sisters both ran track. His parents are phenomenal. So I think he's just well-grounded from that standpoint. He has a really great head on his shoulders, but he's had great support for a long time. And I think he also just recognizes how blessed he is. So, to handle moments like that, he's kind of trained his whole life to be in these situations. He's had adversity before. And I think he realizes, look, I get the chance to play in the NFL. I was drafted in the first round. That's pretty unique and special.
Is there anything, we've spoken a lot on this show and others about his athleticism. And obviously, you can see it in some of the moments that were provided on tape. You can see it in his test scores before the draft. Is there anything, Dan, that you ever saw from Christian that really just forced you to drop your jaw at just what an athletic specimen this guy is? Again, like your experience being around some pretty special athletes is unique in and of itself. So for Christian to impress you in that way, I think would speak volumes. But is there a moment that stands out in your mind when you think about what kind of athlete he is that would sort of illustrate it for us?
Yeah, I don't know if I can pick one moment other than he plays the ball in the deep part of the field better than any DB that I've had. I've had a lot of them, but he judges the ball extremely well in the air and goes and gets it. And I think that's really unique. A lot of guys can cover, a lot of guys can impact the release of a wide out, but for him to be able to go play the ball in the deep part of the field, I think it's really, really impressive. I think we're about 10 practices into his first spring year, and I don't know that he'd given up a catch the first 10 practices. It was really impressive. And eventually our offense had a don't throw it Gonzo rule, right? Because they didn't want to, it was just going to be an incomplete pass or potentially a pick. And he created that just by the way he practiced every day. So there's a lot of moments, a lot of impressive catches down the field, a lot of, he has catch-up speed, but nobody gets behind him very often. So you don't see that all the time. But probably the most impressive thing to me was, we played Arizona earlier in the year and they had a really good slot receiver. So we asked Gonzo to move inside that week and play the nickel. And he had never really done it for us all year. And then that became something we did throughout the rest of the season, especially on third downs, just because he had the skill set to do it. So he's impressive. He's adaptable. He has all those traits.
And when it comes to the mindset, you spoke to that a little bit. I think one thing that's interesting about the Patriots is just the amount of man coverage that they played for a long, long time here. And it sort of waned a little bit. They were a little bit more balanced this past season. And I think that was due in part to the fact that they weren't able to match up in some instances with the guys that they were seeing on the other side of the line. Christian, I think, gives them the ability to do that now. What is it about his mindset, his makeup that will make him a good man corner for the Patriots?
Yeah, just that. He's long. He doesn't have a lot of false steps. He's able to keep a narrow base. And he's going to be able to react off of the release of the guy across from him, which I think is one of the toughest traits for a DB, is to be able to react, not guess, what the person across from you is doing. So he doesn't panic, in the route. He's going to be able to be transition really smooth. It almost looks effortless at times for him. But yeah, he's going to allow you to play both.
I think a lot of people, Dan, here in New England, you think of shutdown corner and you think of, Ty Law and that personality. And he was a flamboyant personality, an aggressive guy. Even Stephon Gilmore, he was soft-spoken, but he would say some things when he did talk that made you raise your eyebrows and say, man, this is a confident dude. He's talking about some of the best receivers in the league. Like, they're not that good. And he's ready to take them on. Does Christian have that to his game, or is he a little bit different personality at that position?
That's not who Christian is. Now he has confidence. He has the level of confidence, but he doesn't have to tell you about it. Right. And I wouldn't mistake that for anything other than focus. The guy's focused. He realized, look, he can go out there and talk, and he will at times, but you're not going to see that a lot. But ultimately, he'd rather show you, and he's going to do that consistently.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, Dan, before we let you go here, is ask you a little bit about Adrian. We did get a chance to meet him a few weeks ago as the team sort of started getting into its offseason work. But Adrian, in your experience with him, what will allow that fit to be a good one? Obviously, he was here as a player. We haven't seen him in a while, but what will make that fit a good one here in New England, in your opinion?
I think what you just said, right? He understands the expectations, being a part of that organization before. He's went and got a really diverse background since that time. Be able to coach at a couple different spots, including the NFL and in here, and has the mind of a guy that can really operate at the next level. He's a phenomenal coach. I know he'll do a great job for you guys.
All right, well, Dan Lanning, thank you so much for being with us here on Next Pass. This has been great to learn a little bit more about Christian, learn a little bit more about Adrian Klum as well. Good luck as you head into everything off season that is involved with you guys right now. I know it's a busy time, recruiting and everything else going on. So we really appreciate the time you spent with us here today.
You bet. Thank you. Have a great one.
The NBA playoffs are here, and you can turn crossovers into cash with FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/NBCSB right now and place a $5 bet, and you'll get an instant
$150 in bonus bets. That's win or lose. FanDuel is so easy to use. You know you're going to see great promotions there every single day. You know the app is safe and secure, and you know you're going to get paid instantly, which you will love. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sports book. Just go to FanDuel.com/NBCSB and sign up to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet your first $5. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Hope is here. GamblingHelplineMA.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support. Massachusetts. Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 New York. 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, or Virginia. 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342 in Arizona. 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. 1-800-522-4700 or visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas. 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit www.mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming or visit www.1800gambler.net in West Virginia.
Great stuff there from Dan. If you were creating a player in Madden, you would look like Christian Gonzalez, is essentially what Dan Lanning is telling us there. And hard to argue, right? We knew what a great athlete he would be, and we've gone into detail as to just how elite he is, you know, what kind of company he's keeping when it comes to great athletes who play in the defensive backfield, who are drafted in the first round. There aren't many who are on Gonzalez's level when it comes to the pre-draft testing, but the ones who are have turned into really, really good players. A couple of them Hall of Fame level players. So you start with that, and then you go to the demeanor, then you go to the mentality, then you go to the psyche. And I thought Dan gave us some really valuable insight there as well. The fact that Christian Gonzalez can hit the flush button, quote unquote, really quickly, something you have to have as a defensive back. And while he may not be Ty Law or Stephon Gilmore, he still has the focus and the confidence to be a really good player at the next level. Again, Lanning would know. He's been around a lot of good defensive players, specifically at the University of Georgia. He understands what it takes. And then the last thing that I actually really wanted to share with you guys, because we got into some X's and O's there too, man versus zone, what exactly makes him a really good man corner, what will allow him to have success in zone as well. But he got into just how well he tracks. Gonzalez tracks the football. And that to me made my ears perk up, because that was a trait Devin McCourty told me about years ago that J.C. Jackson had in spades. And before J.C. Jackson became J.C. Jackson, even then, McCourty knew this guy tracks the ball better than anybody I've ever been around here with this team. And so if Gonzalez has that, if he has all the physical tools, plus that innate ability, that instinct to be able to find the football the way J.C. Jackson did, and we know the kind of interception numbers that J.C. Jackson put up when he was here with the Patriots, you could end up with a really, really special player really, really quickly. So we'll see how it works out. We know that the interception numbers in college for Gonzalez were not through the roof, but there's a lot that goes into that. How often was he targeted relative to other corners? You know, did they just not have the opportunity to pick off the football the way others might have? You know, I think Lanning, what makes that conversation interesting to me is how many reps has he seen of Christian Gonzalez against a good offense. And Oregon, for the most part, has been a pretty good offense. And Bo Nix is going to be a guy who's drafted in the first round, in all likelihood, next year, the quarterback at Oregon right now. Was at Auburn, up and down career there, goes to Oregon, all of a sudden, he lights it up. How many times did he see in practice? And he mentioned, first 10 practices they had, they realized, we haven't completed a pass on this guy yet, is what Lanning thought was the case there with Gonzalez at Oregon. So I think for a coach, anytime we have any of these coaches on with us, of course, are they going to be biased toward their guy? Yes. But at the same time, they've seen so many reps of these players. They're going to be able to tell us some things, because it is a small sample size, what you get in a college season. they're going to be able to tell us some things that we may not know about the player based on his tape, based on what's out there, right? What happens on game days. There are things that happen in practice that are indicative of what a guy can be as a player that may not always show up or show up as consistently in the game, again, because those reps are relatively few and far between. So I just found that to be interesting, that tracking the football trait is one that we should be watching for from Christian Gonzalez, and watching for it as early as this week. We have OTA practices to go to, guys. Our first one is this week. It's on Thursday. Wanted to make sure we got the pod out nice and early, fresh out of the pod box for you as quickly as we could, because we did want to look ahead a little bit to OTAs and talk about a couple of the storylines that we're going to be tracking there. Of course, we're going to be watching, number one, Mac Jones and Bill O'Brien. What is their relationship like on the field? How are those guys interacting? And then I would say secondarily to that, what does the offense look like with Bill O'Brien? My guess, and the indications that I've gotten, is that it will look pretty similar to what we saw in 2021. Now, will the language be exactly the same? I'm not sure. Will it be 100% just a carryover from Josh McDaniels to Bill O'Brien and it's the same old stuff? I'm not sure of that either. I would be surprised if we don't see things like RPOs incorporated and a little bit more creatively than they were last year for Mac Jones. Last year, you got essentially the bubble screen RPO left, bubble screen RPO right from the Patriots. When they ran it, that's what it was. And yes, they hit a home run with Marcus Jones with his long catch and run touchdown. First time he touched the football offensively for the Patriots last season. But they could do more there. And Bill O'Brien knows that. And Bill O'Brien has plenty of experience coaching that. And so that's something that I'll be keeping an eye on. RPO usage specifically in the spring, because in the spring is when you get this stuff down. You're installing right now. And so are you going to be working hardcore on duo, inside zone, power, counter? Like, that's not what this time of year is for necessarily. Yes, you're installing everything. You're installing an offense. You want to make sure you have your concepts down. But this is passing camp. There's no pads. It's helmets, T-shirts, shorts. The RPO stuff and the ball handling involved there and the route running involved there, that's something you can work on right now. And that's something we may be privy to when we're out there at practice for the first time. So Mac Jones, Bill O'Brien, Bill O'Brien's offense, Mac Jones, Bill Belichick. Of course, we'll be keeping an eye on their interactions and what those are like. And just the reps at the quarterback position. This is all related. It's all sort of under the same umbrella here. But how are things split up? Who's working with whom? Is Mac Jones out there first for every drill, for every rep? Is he getting the bulk of the passing stuff? I think, again, this time of year, it would not be surprising to see a split and see it relatively even, because this isn't competition camp. So everybody's trying to get reps. Everybody's trying to get the install. When it gets to training camp, if things are still split then, and both guys are working with, for instance, David Andrews in the first team offensive line, then I think that's something that we're going to need to have some good long conversations about. But even if it happens as early as this week, we'll be paying attention. We'll be able to relay it back to you, and we'll tell you what we see, what we hear, what we know, as we always do here on Next Pat. Some other things that I will be watching. I'm trying to envision who will be the third down back here in New England. That's a storyline I want to watch. I think Ty Montgomery should be the lead dog in that conversation. You heard James White talk to Tom Curran about that on the Patriots Talk podcast last week. Everybody forgets about him, gets hurt after week 1 last year, and I get it. He's a veteran guy. Maybe you can't depend on him because he's closer to the end than the beginning. But you also need to depend on whoever's in that role to know that they're going to be on their P's and Q's when it comes to the pass protection game. Talked about it with James White on this podcast. Talked about it all leading up to the draft. If they wanted to invest in that kind of player in the draft, would it be someone who would have some pass protection experience and someone you could trust in that regard and trust them relatively quickly, which is something that Bill Belichick has not done with rookies at that position, by and large. Maybe it's Pierre Strong in year 2. Maybe he's on the James White track. Don't play a whole lot as a rookie. Year 2, all of a sudden you step in, you've got one of the most important roles on the offense. That could be the case. And maybe we get some clues as to whether or not that's happening as early as this week. That's one thing I'll be keeping an eye on. How about the offensive line? I just said this is not the time for the road graders, right? It's not. It just isn't. That's the nature of the deal this time of year in May, in June, during OTAs, mini camps. However, that being said, we've got an injury. Mike Owenu underwent offseason ankle surgery, according to Mike Reese of ESPN. And so now I'm wondering who's going to be at right guard. Cole Strange at left guard, David Andrews at center, player X at right guard. I mean, is it James Ferentz? Are you just going to throw him in there because he's the veteran? Or do you have one of the rookies in there? You spent 4th round picks on Jake Andrews and Sidney So. I think both guys are guard options. You know, Jake Andrews played guard in college before he transitioned to center in the latter stages of his career there at Troy. Sidney So, tackle to guard. He's sort of that type of hybrid on the offensive line. So does one of those guys get the nod to be the Owenu, the early Owenu, quote unquote, replacement until Owenu's ready to go? That's something that I'll be keeping an eye on, and we will have further updates on both of those players, Jake Andrews and Sidney So. How about Antonio Mafi? Let's throw him in there as well. 5th round pick, right? So you would think Andrews and So would have him in the pecking order. But in terms of body type and I would say high-level collegiate experience, you know, you're talking about UCLA versus Eastern Michigan versus Troy. Antonio Mafi is this big, mauling, maybe guard-only kind of player. You know, maybe he's the fit at right guard to fill in for Mike Owenu, who had the same sort of description when he was coming out of college as a 6th round pick for the Patriots a few years ago, back in 2020. So that's an interesting storyline to watch as well. You have to have the interior of that pocket settled for Mac Jones. We understand that, right? Pocket guy, you can't have any kind of issues with your middle 3. You get issues at tackle, that's a problem too. But at least if the pocket is there for you, the interior is there for you, you can step up, avoid those rushers that way, elude them by moving north-south as opposed to east-west. Maybe you've got a shot. So that's an important spot for them to get figured out. Christian Gonzalez, where is he? Where is Keon White? Is he on the edge? Is he on the interior of the defensive line? Again, that's somebody that's going to flash a little bit more when the pads come on, but where is he aligned during these OTAs, during these mini camps? How do they envision using him? A couple of other rookies at the receiver position. Remember, this is the time last year when Trey Nixon really lit it up, and we had a conversation with him here on Next Pats, and he was great. And he had a great spring. Did it mean much for him come the fall? It did not. So who is that player in this year's spring, during this year's OTAs, who shows promise, but we still have to just remind ourselves to pump the brakes because it is what it is. It is May 25th will be our first practice on those fields behind Gillette Stadium. So, Kayshon Boutte, it is Boutte, not Boutte, not Boutte, Boutte. Kayshon Boutte, Pop Douglas, Demario Douglas from Liberty. Which of those guys flashes, maybe flashes early? That'll be something interesting to watch as well. We may have a couple of other surprising storylines for you if, for instance, they have Trent Brown working at right tackle as opposed to left tackle, or if Tyquan Thornton is out there for every single snap and one of the veteran receivers is maybe getting a blow and Tyquan Thornton's on the outside and he's running deeper routes and they're using him more consistently out there. You know, are you seeing any flashes from him in terms of making that year 2 leap that everybody in New England is so consistently talking about? You know, we'll keep an eye out for those sorts of storylines as well. Any surprises out there? But that's what's on my mind as we head to our first practice. Let's get to a couple of questions. We have a couple mailbag questions. I want to hit those. We also have some shout outs that I have to do from the fine folks out there who left 5-star reviews. Really appreciate you all. Want to make sure we shout everyone out. We did get a ton of questions, which is fine. Believe me, that's fine on my end. If you don't feel like leaving a question on the comments section on Apple iTunes, all good. But we will shout out some of the folks that left 5-star reviews because that's what helps. That's the lifeblood of our podcast. What helps keep us going. Okay, but let's get to the bag right now. Rich G at Rich G 6567 says, how much fuel does James Robinson have left in the tank? People love James Robinson. People want to know, or Rich wants to know specifically, can he legitimately be an RB2 behind Ramondre Stevenson? I think he can. I think the question is, can you depend on it? And when I say that, I mean James Robinson is somebody who signed for $0 fully guaranteed dollars, which is a bit rare. No signing bonus, nothing fully guaranteed for James Robinson, somebody who's done a little something in the league. But it just goes to show this is a let's see kind of contract. Can you stay healthy? Can you stay on the field? Can you really give us something? So if I had to guess, would James Robinson be on the roster? Would he be someone that they would trust going into the season and look at him and say, there's our RB2? No, I would not. And I would look at the contract. The contract tells the story oftentimes, guys, with what a team's plan is for that particular player. It's not a hard and fast rule. Certainly, you have tryout players like Malcolm Butler, okay, end up winning you a Super Bowl. But for the most part, the contract is indicative of what the plan is. So at this point in time, it's hard for us to go off of much more than that. All right, our guy Miguel at Pat's Cap wants to know, what's the latest on the Jack Jones grievance? Miguel, unless I missed something, Jack Jones did not file a grievance. And again, I will check, I will double check, I will triple check. But it was Jake Bailey who filed the grievance. Now, both of those guys, their suspensions were announced, I believe. I believe they hit the wire on the same day. They were team suspensions, and Jake Bailey is the one who certainly filed a grievance, made that very public. He's talked about it now that he's with the Dolphins. That thing has been resolved, but I don't believe there was ever a grievance filed on Jack Jones's part. And let me just say, smart by him. You're going to file a grievance as a rookie because you did something that Bill Belichick deemed was suspension worthy. Something that, and I know he's a hard guy to play for. I know he's pretty strict as far as modern day head coaches go, but you're going to file a grievance against Bill Belichick as a rookie 4th round pick. I'm not sure that's a great recipe for the long-term prospects of your overall professional health, meaning the health of your career. Let's just say that. Okay, Jack Tweedle. Why are more people not thrilled about the work to revamp our atrocious special teams from last year? Huge fan of the Chris Board signing and ecstatic to have a kicker and punter on the roster who can get the ball through the end zone on a kickoff, plus retaining Slater and Judge. All right, Tweedle. We have some news today that just came down that the league has changed the kickoff once again. And any fair catch caught on a kickoff inside the receiving team's 25-yard line will then be placed at the 25-yard line. So that means touchbacks, essentially, guaranteed to the 25 on any kick that goes inside the 25. You don't have to get it through the end zone anymore. Will teams take advantage of this? Receiving teams? I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of return men and even special teams coordinators who, in that moment, if you catch it and you're not in the end zone, I think they're looking for the big play. They have confidence that they can create a big play. You know, they feel good about who they are and why they have that job. So are they going to concede in that manner? You catch it at the 5 and you're going to fair catch that thing and make sure you get it at the 25? When in all likelihood, if you're catching it at the 5, you think you're at least getting to the 25, if not the 30 or the 35. I just think that's the mindset. So this rule change has gotten a lot of pub, and I know special teams coordinators are against it because it is another way, quite frankly, it is another way of getting the kickoff removed from the sport. And that's what the owners and the competition committee are trying to do because they deem it a very dangerous play. And the numbers would tell you that it is. I would just say, I'm not sure this is going to be all that much incentive to get teams to stop trying to get the ball out from their end zone or from the shadow of their own end zone for more explosive plays. That's number one. Number two, if it does limit returns, and it has at the college level, this is the college rule now. And if you're familiar with the college game, you're familiar with this rule. The return rate in college, I believe the NFL announced today, went from something like 38% to 31%. So it did drop. The number of kick returns did go down, though it wasn't as though they were completely eliminated. This does impact the Patriots specifically because we've been over their investment, and some might argue their overinvestment in the kicking game. Now, obviously, Jack Tweedle wouldn't be one of those. Their special teams were bad. pour a bunch of money into your special teams. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. I'm happy as a Patriots fan. Like I think that's where some people are. I know there are others who would say, why? Is this really necessary? There are plenty of teams in the league who can avoid giving up 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns in the season finale to make sure that they don't make the postseason without having Matthew Slater, Brendan Schooler, Chris Board, Cody Davis, Amir Speed, DeMarcus Mitchell. DeMarcus Covington is the defensive line coach. DeMarcus Mitchell is the outside linebacker / defensive lineman who played almost exclusively special teams last year. 6 core special teamers, guys that you think, could be elite or on the precipice of being elite kicking game, kick coverage guys. There are plenty of teams that don't have that many that do okay special teams wise, I think would be the other side of that argument. So the Patriots can't be happy about this. Again, they've invested here. They've invested in Board. They gave him real money. Matthew Slater's getting real money, for a special teamer. It's not like they're breaking the bank on these guys. But this is where I think they would like to have an advantage. And is that advantage in some ways diminished when they are essentially excising the kickoff, or they're trying to, from the sport? Maybe eventually they get to the XFL kickoff, kick return. If you haven't seen that, Google that thing. I think it's kind of fun. I think it might be where it's going. There's a few different options that the league may eventually go to. They haven't completely changed the look of it, but they are in essence trying to change how frequently that play is actually a play. The league would much rather just have everyone run down the field, have that ball bounce out of the end zone, or have somebody fair catch it and just start at the 25-yard line. So we'll see where it goes in the future, but it does impact the Patriots. Again, this is a team that we've seen have a lot of success with those little pooch kicks down to the goal line, and maybe you can still encourage those guys to come out. But now, if a team knows it's coming, maybe they say, you're not going to get us, tackle us at the 10-yard line. We're going to fair catch this thing and make sure we get it out to the 25, especially on those really high kicks where you've got all that time to think about it. Maybe return men will be coached in such a way that it'll be right in the forefront of their minds. I got to wave my arm here. I got to get this to the 25. At D Scooter says, hey, Phil, do you think the Pats will keep the streak alive and have an undrafted rookie free agent make the 53-man roster? It's feeling like a no this year. Their undrafted rookie class is so small. I think that speaks to the depth of the draft in general. The Patriots ended up using a lot of picks, double-digit picks, but do they view some of those guys as essentially undrafted rookie caliber players? The one name that stands out would be Malik Cunningham. They gave him a good amount of money, $200,000 to get him to New England on the 90-man roster. That would be my pick. And maybe they want him on because now there's this rule where you can activate a third quarterback on game day. Doesn't count against your game day roster limit. But just to be clear on that rule, that player has to be on the 53-man roster. So if Bill Belichick went into this offseason saying, we got Bailey, we have Mac, we feel pretty good about both those guys. Bailey's not a rookie anymore. Maybe you don't feel like you need that safety net of having a veteran quarterback that's on the roster that can play on game day if needed, as you did last year with Brian Hoyer. Maybe he's just going into this year thinking they would only need 2 quarterbacks. They've done that many, many times before because they don't want to waste the third. They don't want to waste that roster spot, that 53-man roster spot on a third quarterback who's never going to play. That happens. So would they be willing to use the roster spot on Malik Cunningham so that they could dress him on game day in the rare instance that you would lose not just one quarterback, but 2? I can't remember that happening for the Patriots. I know they got to Bailey Zappi eventually for the Packers last year, but Brian Hoyer started that game, right? So you didn't get to your third quarterback. You got to your second quarterback. I just wonder if the Patriots are going to make use of this rule. So that's where I stand. D Scooter, your question, Malik Cunningham would be my guess. I still would lean against him making the roster if you made me come up with a 53-man roster right now. And I would lean against the Patriots making use of this third quarterback rule because, again, you have to have that guy on the roster. I'm just not sure Bill Belichick's going to be willing to carry a third quarterback this year. But we'll see. At Livy Williams 10 says, Who do you see emerging as the number one tight end? Is there any chance Gesicki gets more snaps than Henry at some point? I think Gesicki would get more snaps than Henry in obvious passing situations. So does that mean he'll get more snaps overall? I doubt it. He's just not that kind of player. He's a sub player. You can use him obviously in 12 personnel packages. That's actually, I think, where they should be using him most, because outside of 2-minute or third and long situations, again, those obvious passing situations, if you have him on the field on early downs and he's the only tight end, the other team is not going to respect you running the football at all. You know that the Patriots are going to be passing in all likelihood in those situations because he's essentially a receiver. You've got 10 personnel on those fields. You've got 4 receivers and 1 running back, and that's your skill group when Mike Gesicki's out there. So I don't think he'll play more snaps than Hunter Henry, though I do think he could be the option over Henry in some really critical situations. So it's not the overall snaps, but when is he on the field? He might be on the field 2 minutes left in the game and the Patriots down 3. And Hunter Henry might not be. That there could be packages where I see that happening. So good question there, Levy. I think it's a nuanced one. But Gesicki, we should put him on the OTA storylines to watch. That's another player that I'm obviously really, really interested in how they're going to use him. At @anypatriot_USA says, relative unknown who becomes a 2023 Patriots impact player. Good question. Relative unknown. I feel like if you're listening to this podcast, there is nobody on the roster right now who's unknown to you. Is it Ty Montgomery? Is it one of the rookies that got drafted late? I think we talked about this before because I think we went over it when I gave you my recent 53-man roster projection, but I do like Douglas. Demario Douglas. That's who we'll go with as the unknown to make an impact in 2023. Last one here at Quality Smoke, friend of the podcast, with a new OL coach and the drafting of 2 road grader guards. There is a potential return to a power scheme up front. Cole Strange was drafted last year to meet the wide zone idea. What does he have to do to fit the new offensive line direction? Well, they're not going to move on from him. He's a first-round pick. Whether he's a quote-unquote scheme fit or not, you're a first-round pick. You got to be able to function in a variety of different schemes. Now, I think you're spot on here, Quality Smoke. I really do. The Patriots had the idea last year that they were going to do more zone, more inside zone, more outside zone, and they wanted an athlete. And Cole Strange was one of the best, if not the best athletes on the interior of the offensive line last year. And so he was a fit for what they wanted to do. And they start moving away from that. Do they pull him out of the starting lineup? Do they say, we got to get you out. We got to get a bigger body, more of a double teaming, road grading type, as you mentioned here, Quality Smoke. No, they didn't. They kept him in the starting lineup because he's a first round pick and they're going to keep him in the starting lineup this offseason. But you are right on that front. And we're going to get to it with City So conversation, with Jake Andrews conversation that's coming up here on this podcast in future episodes. These guys are duo guys. These guys are gap scheme guys. These guys can pull. They want to get downhill. They want to maul you. Antonio Mafi, throw him into the mix as well. And the draft is always, it's why we cover it so thoroughly. Number one, it's an indicator of how your team is going to perform moving forward. The reason why the Patriots aren't where they've been for a long, long time is because they drafted poorly. Period. That's the number one reason. Had they drafted better, Tom Brady may have stuck around for a couple more years. May have given you a little bit more of a cushion in terms of finding the next guy. And maybe you would have drafted that next guy. Had they drafted better, they would be in a better spot. I wouldn't be talking about them as a 500 team. We wouldn't be talking about them as missing the postseason 2 of the last 3 years. It's a tough thing to do. It's hard to draft and draft consistently. I get it, but that's the reason. That's the reason. That's why we cover it so thoroughly. But the other reason is because it tells us where the team wants to go. You have to show your cards in the draft. What do you want to be? You want to be a zone blocking team? Better go get a zone blocking guard when you don't have a starting caliber guard on your roster after trading Shaq Mason. They went and got Cole Strange. You want to shift? You want to pivot there? You want to become more of a gap team, a duo team, a downhill team? Go get yourself some mauling guards and centers. Jake Andrews, City So, Antonio Mafi, all qualify. Do they look like the guys that want to get east-west, haul ass to the sideline? backside blocks, cutoffs, reaches. You need some great athletes to be able to execute some of this stuff. Is that who these guys are? I would say no. Again, you're going to hear from some of their coaches, and they're going to describe to you the offenses that they ran at Troy, at Eastern Michigan. And it sounds a lot like the stuff the Patriots used to run prior to the 2022 experiment. So to answer your question, QS, Cole Strange not going anywhere, but the guys they drafted are a sign of where the team is going moving forward with its run game. All right, thanks to everyone who contributed a question this week. Thank you to our Apple iTunes comment section all-stars. 5 stars from Coach Ice on the Warpath, from Hawk, Haak, from Chip from CT, from Mech 1954, from Realm 414, from Mia J. Drummy, from CJE 66. Fruity Pebbles, 5 stars. You guys are phenomenal. LW Jr. 22 with the 5 stars. AJ Perry, probably a cousin of mine, I assume, leaving a 5-star review as well. Ratzo with a question mark, 5-star review. Uncle Frank 22. KPC, friend of the podcast, longtime friend of the podcast, 5-star review. Thank you. And again, if you want to leave us a 5-star review and leave us a question, I will make sure that takes priority. That will be top billing next time we do a podcast mailbag here, guys. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for contributing, as you always do. Thanks so much to Dan Lanning for joining us here on Next Pats. We are going to have a practice to talk about very, very soon. Very excited for that later this week. We'll get to it next week. We'll do a little bit of a review after we previewed it this week, but we'll have some practices moving forward that we're going to be able to take in. We've got mini camp. That's 3 days in a row of media access and practice. So we're going to know a lot more about this team just a couple of weeks from now than we do even right now. I'm excited for it. I know you are too. Thanks again for listening, guys. We'll talk to you very soon.